Welcome back to another UNC Tar Heels basketball podcast here on TarHeelIllustrated.com. And if you're watching us on our fast-growing YouTube channel that is called Tar Heel Illustrated, I am THI publisher Andrew Jones. And joining me is our director of basketball recruiting and analyst, longtime AAU college and high school coach, Mr. David Sisk. And David, we are previewing the Tar Heels individually as we build toward the start of the 2021-22 season. The Heels open up, I believe it's November 8th against Loyola of Maryland. They jump into it a couple weeks later with some tough games in the Mohegan Sun with Purdue and perhaps either Tennessee or Villanova. So this club's going to have an opportunity to come together early in the season. They're going to get tested. And a guy that we're going to learn a lot from by the time they get through the Mohegan Sun is point guard Caleb Love. Last year as a freshman, 10.5 points per game, 3.6 assists, but 3.4 turnovers as well. 2.5 rebounds a game. He shot 32.9% from the field overall, 26.6% from three-point range. He was 34 for 128. Yet after he was 4 for 34 to start the season, he was 31.2%. Still not great, but when I talk to people that are near the situation, they say, look, he was probably more the 32% guy. So when I think about Caleb Love building into this season, I'm judging him more for building from as a 32% perimeter shooter to see whatever he will become. A couple more notes real quickly. He was 50% or better from the floor in just 4 games last year, but 2 of them were the Duke games, 4+ turnovers in 14 games. Double figures scoring in 16 or 19 games. And over the last 7 games of the year, and here are the positives. This is what people talk about, and they say he built late. He averaged 12.1 points a game over the last 7 games. And over the last 12 games, 5 of his 6+ assist games. I'll say that again. He had 7 games last season of 6 or more assists. 5 of them came over the last 12 games. And Roy Williams even talked about how Caleb was a little bit more connected, was doing a better job finding teammates. So that's a load, David. And I did happen to see Caleb at practice the other day. We read the media was allowed to watch his second practice. I talked to you about that a little bit here a few minutes ago. So before I launch into other stuff, because I've already talked for a minute and a half, what are your thoughts about Caleb Love entering his sophomore season?
I would say he's going to be one of the most improved players in the country next year, but that may be a little bit of a lazy take. I don't know what he's up against. You know, it's an easy blanket statement. And then if somebody would ask you, well, who else is going to be there? Who would he compare to? And you're like, well, I don't know. But to be honest with you, I do feel like he's going to be greatly improved, and that's the way I'll put it. I think we've had this discussion before. I think he was a fish out of water last year for a number of reasons. Yeah. And look, I watched him many times in high school, in AAU, watched a lot of live games in high school. I wasn't in St. Louis, but I watched a lot of live stream games against some really good players in that area and nationally. They played a national schedule. And he was really impressive with his ability to make a high degree of difficulty shots and against really good players. And I've said this, he made the type of buckets where when he was playing at home, people were running out of bleachers or running out in the lobby and back and up and down there were like highlight reel plays. And once the crowd got going, he really got into that. And, when I watched it, I'm saying, well, that's not feasible, that's not going to happen in North Carolina. It's not going to be an and one mixtape, but he's got that in him, that God-given scoring ability. So when he came to North Carolina, a lot of times as a freshman that didn't translate. I think there's a couple of reasons. Number one, he's a freshman trying to learn the Roy Williams system. And that's not an easy thing to do. So I would say easily he probably had more pressure on it. And I know you had Garrison Brooks, who was preseason player of the year, and he had all that hanging over him. So I shouldn't say easily. But I think Caleb Love had as much pressure on him as anybody, definitely in the top 2 to 3. Number one, the expectations. But you're trying to learn all that as a freshman. And, that's tough. The point guard's the toughest spot. And like I said, I've heard Eddie Fogler say years ago when he did basketball clinics, he used to say his favorite part of coaching, his favorite day of the year was the first day of practice when freshmen that came in from high school that think they knew basketball, and he could quickly let them know that they didn't know anything about basketball, and by the end of practice, they believed it. And he got off on it. So, that Caleb had to learn all that, and it was tough. I think the other thing too, there were three things. The second one, he was used to playing in space. When he played, it was almost like a 5-out deal when he played, high school in St. Louis. So he goes to North Carolina and they're playing with two bigs. He is a player that's got to be playing downhill. He's got to have lanes. He's got to be in space. He had none of that last year with two bigs and really a team that couldn't stretch the floor. So he's constantly looking for space. I don't think he knew yet as a freshman what to do when he didn't have those options. Okay, I don't have space. I don't have that. What's plan B? I don't think he ever got into plan B. Yeah. And I think that was a huge thing. The other thing, too, was just we talked about the pressure. We talked about that. We talked about the space. And I just feel like he also was the guy that kind of always hit that home run. We talked about the big play capabilities, and we were discussing it before we started here, the turnovers last year. One thing I saw from him, it wasn't necessarily that he didn't read the defense correctly or that or certain things happened. I think sometimes when things got going good, he felt like he could make every play. So if he made a bucket or he made a great pass or great assist, he was going to come back down the floor the next time and try to make that impossible pass. But he didn't feel like there was a pass he couldn't make.
Yeah.
So I think that's where the experience kind of grows. But I'll say this too. We talked about some other games when North Carolina looked bad last year offensively. They could have a game where they look really good, a game where they look really bad. When they looked really bad, the timing and spacing was horrible. Yeah. Players not where they're supposed to be, late on cuts. So everything is precision. If you're running the slice cut, I know that you're going to get that diagonal cross screen from the block to the opposite elbow, and that guy's going to cut. But then a guy forgets to go screen, or he goes to screens the wrong guy, or the guy forgets to cut. We saw that last year plenty of times when guys just were not where they're supposed to be. He sees the guy's going to cut open. He makes the pass, and guess what? The guy forgets to cut. Yeah. So hopefully this year there'll be more in rhythm. I think you take all that. I think he's going to have a huge comfort zone. I think he's going to play more in space. I think he's going to be more downhill just because of this lineup. He's going to be a sophomore. I think he's going to make more shots. I think his percentage is going to be better. I think his turnovers will go down. I think you're going to see a really greatly improved Caleb Love this year.
Well, and to a couple of your points, when they had games where they were moving better and where things were far more in sync, those were the 4 games that Caleb shot over 50% or better. Those were all wins. The 2 games against Duke, the home win over Wake Forest, the home win over NC State. He played very, very well in those games. And I remember the State and Wake games, we're writing stories say, hey, maybe he's starting to really come out of it. And I do think one of the things, too, and this is what I'm understanding, one of the things that has been discussed as he's looked at film throughout the offseason and tried to fix a couple of things that are very fixable from last year is going back to high school, the degree of difficulty. He's the guy that thrived on the degree of difficulty play. That doesn't translate very well to the college level because the degree of difficulty play is far more challenging at that level. And I think that one of the things that they have preached to him, make the safer, smarter play, create the safer, smarter play for yourself. And then we will also help you do that. And I think that's where the more open lanes, the more space being used is going to totally play into his strengths, as you were talking about. And there's another thing too, that I think is really important that people, I think last year didn't really quite understand how much Caleb, probably more than anybody else, was adversely affected by the whole COVID scenario, in that they didn't have the pros come in during the summer for the guys to work with to kind of put him in his place. And Roy has admitted here recently, did a podcast on UNC's official site where he said, look, I didn't have as much time with my guys. So he's getting on Caleb about certain things and trying to get him to do certain things, but he just didn't have as much time. There maybe wasn't the same relationship there. So Caleb had to deal with the pressure of that. And I think also maybe some pressure about, my gosh, came in here thinking I'm OAD and I'm not going to be OAD. And that's a pretty weighty thing for someone to deal with at that age. I think right now, the impression that I'm getting, maybe some things I'm sensing, perhaps a couple of things I'm hearing, is that Caleb is far more relaxed than he was a year ago. He's far more comfortable with where he is at this point in his basketball career. And as you well know, David, as a guy who's coached at various different levels, you played, you can't be tight and be a good basketball player. You can't feel like the world is coming down your back and be a good basketball player, especially when you've got the rock in your hand and the engine relies on you so much. A more relaxed Caleb Love, a more comfortable Caleb Love is going to be a far better Caleb Love. And as a result, North Carolina is going to be a much better team, I think.
You can go back to college football that's going on right now. And I'm trying to remember the team that I was watching Saturday night, but they were talking about that. They were talking about, and it may have been Ole Miss this way. I tell you what it was. I was listening to Paul Feinbaum yesterday, and in a car, and Ole Miss, they're playing Alabama this week, and they were talking about that game, and they were talking about the defense being improved. But that's what they were saying. They had a first-year coach, Lane Kiffin, but they had a first-year defensive coordinator. And defensively, they were bad. And they were saying, what a difference it made. You have new coordinators, new coaches coming in, and they never got they never got all those reps that they would be having in the past, and all the meetings. I think probably people don't realize probably every meeting last year that Roy Williams had with his team, non-game was by Zoom. And, you were talking about just how big a difference it was for you with Caleb Love that when it hit you in practice yesterday. That was the first time you've ever seen him,
that close in person.
Yeah. So
because previously, I know these kids after a while because you're in the locker room on the road after a game, and I realized that's as close as I've seen him, and that did kind of hit me about the whole experience. We in the media we talk about our experience and what we missed out on. The players miss out on a lot more, even though they're together and they were in a similar place. And Roy spent time with them, but it wasn't the same thing. He didn't have the same freshman advantages and breadth of experience that Joel Berry had, that Marcus Page had, that Ty Lawson had, that Kendall Marshall had, all those different guys. He was squeezed into a much more narrow space and on a team that had very little returning experience and had no other playmakers out there on the floor. So that's a huge, huge thing for a guy to deal with. And I think not having that as big an issue this year alone is going to make him a better player. And I'll tell you one of the things, and you go back to the comment you were making. Somebody told me who's kind of close to the program, I don't want to lead it anymore, that they think that Caleb Love could be, first round good this year. And if he's first round good this year, that changes everything to me, what the ceiling of this team could be. It could be last weekend of the season good if Caleb is that kind of player. And there's somebody who knows the situation pretty well that is saying that. And I give them, I put a lot of stock into what they say. I'm not saying it's absolute, but that's what I've heard already now from one person, and may eventually hear that from others, whom I respect.
Most NBA mock draft boards have him late first.
Late first.
Yeah. So if you're, and that would be the highest draft pick on the team. So he's going to be the guy that has the ball in his hands more than anybody else. So, that's huge. So, when you've got the guys that could be your best player now, with the ball in his hands the most, good things happen. And like I said, I think he'll make that improvement. And just for all the reasons you mentioned, and just having more time to develop his game, it's going to be, a huge issue. So, like I said, in a nutshell, I look for really good things out of him and great improvement this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm looking forward to seeing, what kind of player he, and really kind of how over the course of time, how the newness that they're adding, how his game evolves and how it meshes it over time with those other guys. This team's going to be so different in November and December, but how they kind of fuse together by February is going to be really, really interesting. And you can argue the most important player in this team is Caleb Love. As much as Armando might get the hype in Charlotte, if Caleb Love has a fantastic year, this club's going to be really, really good. If he struggles like he did last year, this club's going to have some issues. So I think it begins with him, and it'll be very interesting to see what he does beginning November 8th when they begin the season with Loyola of Maryland. He is David Sisk. I am Andrew Jones. We appreciate you guys stopping by.